From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. On just their second day back in Montgomery, state lawmakers put the 2023 regular session on hold to begin a special session called by Governor Kay Ivey to focus on appropriating the last of federal COVID-19 relief funding. This second round of funding from the American Rescue Plan Act amounts to more than $1 billion. And just like the first round of ARPA funds last year, Ivey and lawmakers are planning on using much of the money to shore up hospitals and nursing homes, build and repair water and sewer infrastructure, and connect rural areas with high-speed broadband internet. Here's a breakdown of the funding plan as proposed by the governor. For infrastructure, $660 million, including $400 million for water and sewer grants, and $225 million for broadband. For public health, $339 million, including $100 million to reimburse hospitals, $40 million for each the Public Education Employees Health Insurance Plan and the State Employees Insurance Board, $23 million for mental health providers, and $20 million for a voluntary clinical trial and research program. For community services, $55 million, including support for food banks, senior services, and long-term housing. There's also $5 million for the Alabama Department of Labor for its expenses in responding to unemployment issues related to the pandemic. The funding bill is starting in the House, where lawmakers introduced it today and will have it in committee tomorrow. House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter said the state is spending this one-time money wisely by investing in projects rather than reoccurring expenses.
One of the big things is, we're trying to expand broadband across our state, and we today's broadband in our state is like electricity was in the 40s. So I think we got to continue down that road, and there is so much business done now, on the internet. I mean, from the standpoint of my business, my wife and I was in the newspaper business, most of you know, and we could run and print and do everything we needed to do without power because of battery backups. We couldn't do it without the internet. And I think there's a lot of business in Alabama today that's like that. So I think it's so important to continue down that road. And then sewer and water, unfortunately, I hate to say, in the 21st century, we got places in our state that doesn't have fresh drinking water. We don't have city water. A lot of them still run off wells. So I think that's an important investment in our state. And that's what we have planned to do, is make investments in our state. And listen, I've got to applaud our governor and our legislative body. I mean, there's a lot of states that have spent this money on reoccurring. We have not. We have spent it on investments into our state that's going to make our state better for the long run, and I applaud them for that.
Besides ARPA, Governor Ivey included one other item in her special session call: paying back the Alabama Trust Fund. More than a decade ago, in lean financial times, lawmakers borrowed $400 million from the trust fund to fill holes in the budget. Year by year, the legislature has paid that money back, with the remaining $59 million balance to be paid this year. State Senator Greg Albritton is carrying the payback bill. He said now is a good time to clear that debt.
I think it's the obligation of everybody to pay their bills, and we made that obligation to the people. The ATF was set up by the legislature for the people. That's money, royalty money coming off the oil and gas resources being drilled off the coast. That state-owned property belongs to the people. That was a long time ago set up to be put into the trust fund. That has been accumulating, and that's where the most money comes from. The general fund is from the interest that's earned from that. So when we borrowed that, we had to go to the people with a constitutional amendment, get their approval to borrow that money. And as I mentioned, that went up over $400 million. And we spent it, we filled the holes, we started trying to pay it back, and now we're going to do it. We're going to get that resolved.
When the special session concludes next week, it will be back to regular order. That means starting the process of passing state budgets. State Finance Director Bill Poole gave a presentation to lawmakers on Tuesday about what the governor's recommendations would be for both budgets. He said Ivey would be proposing a $2.97 billion general fund budget, which represents an 8.4% increase over the current fiscal year.
We will be focused substantially on debt reduction, making sure we have adequate reserves in both budgets. You heard Kirk's comments related to that as well, and I fully support the same. And where are some one-time spending? We know that we don't want to create recurring obligations that are unnecessary that we may not be able to sustain going forward, particularly recognizing on both budget sides federal spending that's going to wind down relative to the pandemic.
Poole also discussed the Education Trust Fund, which has an unprecedented $2.8 billion surplus of revenue. Governor Ivey said in her State of the State speech last night that she wants to use that surplus to offer Alabamians a one-time $400 tax rebate, plus make investments in programs aimed to improve education.
Capital projects targeting particular K-12 needs and higher education. Again, looking for one-time investments, preferably deferred maintenance, although that's not an absolute statement. Number of statewide economic workforce type development projects. We heard and know very well we have a lot more jobs than we have people to fill them. And we've got to get more people trained and ready in the workforce. That's a constant theme across all of our efforts, particularly in terms of education investments.
Poole said the governor's education budget will total $8.79 billion, a 6.5% increase over the current fiscal year. The full budget details won't be released until the regular session resumes. The legislature will have a special visitor tomorrow. Recently retired U.S. Senator Richard Shelby will address a joint session of the Alabama legislature in the Capitol. We'll be there to cover the former senator's remarks and speak with him about his remarkable career. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Joining me next is State Representative Matt Simpson from Daphne. Mr. Simpson, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Now, you've got the first filed bill in the House this year, House Bill 1, dealing with fentanyl. And it got a significant boost last night from Governor Kay Ivey, who highlighted it in her State of the State speech, saying, please pass this bill. It has to do with penalties for fentanyl trafficking. Can you walk me through what it does?
Absolutely. Fentanyl is the only drug in Alabama where if you're caught trafficking that drug, there's no mandatory minimum prison sentence that you have. So if you're trafficking heroin, if you're trafficking methamphetamine, if you're trafficking cocaine, even if you're trafficking marijuana, there's a mandatory minimum prison sentence that you have to serve for that. Fentanyl is the only drug that does not have that. This bill came up. I had a prosecutor from the district attorney's office in Baldwin County who reached out to me and said, hey, we're prosecuting somebody for trafficking fentanyl and there's no mandatory minimum. And I said, but that just doesn't seem right. So I looked into it, then I reached out to the District Attorneys Association and said, hey, what's going on? What can we do to fix this? So we started working on legislation. It was back in the summer of last year. Went through the District Attorneys Association, went through the Department of Forensic Science, worked with a lot of people behind the scenes to kind of make sure the numbers are correct and the weights are correct on what we're looking at, and then started working with other members of the legislature, working with the governor's office, working with the attorney general's office, working with the Speaker of the House. Speaker Ledbetter has been tremendous on this. This has been something he told me he wanted me to have it ready to go. Mm-hmm. He indicated he wanted it to be House Bill 1 and get ready to have it. So we had everything ready to go, and as soon as we could open it up, as soon as the bill was opened up, I was the first one to drop it.
So what is the definition of trafficking? Does it have to do with the amount? Does it have to do with the activity? What defines trafficking? Trafficking
is anyone who sells, manufactures, delivers, or is in possession of a certain weight of the drug. So this isn't your just one pill person. This isn't just your addict or your user. These are the people that are bringing it into the community, the people that are distributing and bringing that drug into our communities that we have. Now, we wanted to make sure that we went after the distributors. This comes through, unfortunately, with the border situation that we have right now, with what's going on with the open border. This this drug, the precursors for this drug are manufactured in China. They send it over to Mexico, and they're bringing it through the open border. They're using the Mexican cartels to have that infrastructure that they already have through trafficking other drugs that come through. And my understanding is once fentanyl it hits the border, it is in Alabama within 24 hours. There. What we're looking at and what this bill will do is anyone who has between 1 and 2 grams of fentanyl, which is, this is a gram. This packet here is a gram of sweet and low. It's not fentanyl.
Thanks, yeah.
If it was fentanyl, this could kill up to 500 people.
Wow.
So a deadly dose
Can I?
Absolutely.
Wow.
A deadly dose of fentanyl is 2 milligrams. So 2 of those individual morsels could be a fatal dose of what we have through there.
And I remember we had this whole episode on drug treatment and prevention and things like that, and they were saying that they would put this drug and make it look like a Xanax or make it look like Adderall or something like that. I'm assuming it's not the entire pill, but because goodness, if that can kill so many people, probably traces of it.
They cut it up. Absolutely, they can cut through this, and that's why there are people, so many are using it right now. That's why the dealers are using it right now. You can buy a kilo of heroin for about $6,000, and by the time you cut it up on the streets and just kind of chop it up, if you will, you can make about $80,000 on that kilo. For the same $6,000, you can buy a kilo of fentanyl. By the time you chop it up with so little small doses, you can make $1.6 million.
Wow. So
you just have to put a little bit, all the dealers are doing is, the manufacturers are doing is putting just a small amount into what some people think would be a Xanax bar, some of these other drugs that people commonly take. And so they throw it in there for that extra high. And unfortunately, you're not dealing with scientists in labs and coats. You're dealing with people who just manufacture this. It's kind of a Breaking Bad situation, if you will, where they're coming through and they're just putting together what they can. You don't know what's in an individual batch. You don't know how much fentanyl they're putting into the pill. You don't know, they're not weighing it tremendously. They're just throwing some stuff in there and calling it through.
It's not exactly FDA approved, which is why we're seeing so many overdose deaths, right, including young people.
Absolutely. The deaths in Alabama went from 150 to 417 deaths in fentanyl in 2021. It just gone up from 2020 to 2021. This drug has become an epidemic on our communities, and it's killing so many people left and right. A lot of people don't know that fentanyl is in what they're taking. A lot of people, unfortunately, this isn't an issue where if you're addicted, it will kill you over time. Fentanyl is a pill where one pill will kill you. If you have more than that 0.2 milligrams in there, then 2 milligrams in there, then it can kill you. And that's unfortunately, people are finding out the hard way. We had a girl in Sims who was 14 years old who just didn't know, we kid people all the time. They don't have a history of drug use. It's not like something where their families anticipated this. This is just something where they got a bad batch and it killed them.
Now, there are critics of your bill, or more, maybe increased penalties in general, who would say, if somebody has a certain amount of fentanyl, yes, maybe they're trafficking under the law, but they could be an addict themselves, and shouldn't they be in treatment rather than sending them to prison with a drug addiction, where we know drugs are so prevalent in our prisons anyway? Isn't treatment a better option for that addict?
Well, that's why we've kind of scaled up what the punishments are. So if you have between 1 and 2 grams of fentanyl, and again, up to 2 grams can kill 1,000 people, then that is a mandatory minimum of 3 years to serve. If you have between 2 and 4 grams of fentanyl, then that'll be a mandatory minimum of 10 years to serve. If you have between 4 and 8 grams of fentanyl, then that'll be a mandatory minimum of 25 years to serve. And if you have more than 8 grams of fentanyl, then that's mandatory life. So these won't be the users. We factored this bill, we went through this and crafted this bill in a manner so that we're going after the dealers. We're going after the people that are trafficking it up that corridor, that I-10 corridor from where I am, and you use that interstate system. It goes all the way up through all of our communities in Alabama as they go through, from the border all to Florida in that perspective, or even if they come up to go through Huntsville, they go through Montgomery, Birmingham, those cities. That's where the fentanyl is, because that's where they're trafficking through, because they're trying to get it to that corridor of it. So you see the stops that are constantly occurring. You see the officers that are stopping this, and that's what we're trying to get to, is to make sure the message comes out there that if you traffic fentanyl, if you're bringing fentanyl into our state, we're going to come after you and you're going to spend a lengthy amount of time in jail. I understand the argument about, hey, everybody should get rehab. I disagree. Some people need prison. Some people need to be put out of the streets, and so they can't hurt anybody else. With a packet that small, with 1 gram, the fact you could kill up to 500 people with fentanyl with that, we need to get people off our streets who are doing that.
Now, before you were in the legislature, you were a prosecutor yourself, correct?
Correct.
Does that career history kind of lend to your, you're involved in criminal justice bills?
It does. That's where I grew up. That's what I've learned. That was my profession to kind of come through. So I focus on criminal justice bills because that's what I know. I ran because there wasn't somebody with my voice that when I was running in 2018 that there didn't have a background for that. You don't have a lot of prosecutors in here. You have some law enforcement, you have some other lawyers that are through there, but you generally don't have that prosecutor, understanding of the day-to-day operations of how a bill can change and a law can change, what goes on in a courtroom every day, what can go on with the sentencing, what can go on with how if you have a comma here or a period here, it can change everything on understanding of a law. So I wanted to run as part of that, and that was part of my campaign platform, and I'm happy to continue that fight.
Yeah, because, all right, now lawmakers passed the law. The law enforcement officers, the cops, go and make the arrest, but it's the prosecutors who have to make all that work, right? And so that's a big, important perspective to keep in mind when passing these laws.
And that's what I try to do. I stay in communication with a lot of prosecutors that I formerly worked with, and that's how this bill came up. It was a prosecutor I used to work with that came and said, hey, we got a problem with stuff. I've passed a number of bills where prosecutors have reached out and said, hey, we need to look into what we have here. We've addressed stolen gun laws, came from a prosecutor that I had worked with. We've addressed changing the child sexual laws for sex offenders. We've addressed the offenders that commit offenses. It's good to be able to have that voice for prosecutors so that they can reach out and say, hey, I've got a problem with this. Or when we try to enforce this law, this is what we're running into in the courts, and this is what the defense attorneys are saying, this is what the judges are saying, and how do we fix this problem?
Well, we're out of time right now, but I want to have you back because I want to talk about the larger issue of crime and have your perspective as a prosecutor. So please come back.
I'll be happy to do so.
Representative Matt Simpson of Daphne, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is State Senator Rodger Smitherman from Birmingham. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I wanted to have you on the show to talk about the issue of the day, and that is ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funds. Governor Kay Ivey called the legislature into special session within the regular to focus solely on this issue. It's the second round of funding, and y'all have begun that process today. How's it going, and where are these funds, the second round of funds, going to be spent?
Well, I think it's moving very well at the pace we're moving at. We're going to have probably about 2 weeks to get it done. And I think that the bill that's going to be introduced is setting up categories of funds and what they'll be spent for. And among those, of course, broadband. One of the categories is going to assist rural hospitals. We had about 17 of them to close, give or take 1 or 2. And also there's funds dealing with drainage, dealing with clean water, and as well as there's a general fund, I think it's about $55 million that will deal with small businesses, trying to help them, get situated and get set up. And so I think that we're going to be addressing those. And one of the things I think that we will be sort of debating It's about what, if anything else, should be included in those categories.
I was going to ask you about that because I remember last time we talked, or one of the times we talked, a lot of wastewater, sewer, water and sewer projects in ARPA 1. You were saying, cities need help with stormwater. I know Birmingham and the surrounding areas have a real hard time when storms come through with flooding. So does the Mobile area, Huntsville, I think.
Yes.
Is that going to be addressed in the bill, or are you more looking for ADEM to take care of that?
Well, hopefully we'll be able to address it in some shape, form, or fashion in the bill. I like to tell people this, that when you look at your map, we are in the valley of the Appalachian Mountains, and people can't visualize that, thinking about the Appalachian Mountains coming all the way down the East Coast, but we're sitting in the valley, and all the water that comes off these mountains are here in our valley, and that's one of the reasons why we have stormwater drainage. And my hopes is that in those categories we'll be able to put language in there that will allow that to be considered, not necessarily segregating it out, but actually making it a part of that. And you can easily build a case for it because when you're talking about drainage, then of course the cause of the drainage has to do with the storm water, and there is corrections that can be made as the water, storm water is flowing, that you can direct them to drains that it needs to go into, or you can enlarge those drains. Say if it's a 16-inch pipe to an 18-inch, that it will accept that. So they go hand in hand. Storm water and the drainage, because the drainage is where the water going.
Sure.
So I hope
if you have a backup, that creates a septic problem, right?
That's right. A health problem, flooding for people, and we've had a few people to die. They've been in those cars and flooding and can't get out. So I think that that's very critical, and it affects everybody in the state. It affects Birmingham, and I like to say it like this: it affects Birmingham, like you said, Montgomery, Mobile, Huntsville, and Vestavia. So that's what I mean. It affects area. It doesn't matter what party, doesn't matter economical situation of an area. It affects everybody, and this is an opportunity, I think, for us to at least make a little headway into it.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much water and sewer issues have come into focus since these funds have been available, and just the crazy demand out there. Let's switch gears while we have time. I want to ask you, just in general, going into this session, what is the Democratic caucus there in the Senate? What is going to be y'all's focus? Do y'all have some priority legislation issues that you're going to be advocating this session?
Well, one of them is going to be Medicaid expansion. As you've heard said many times, you can call it whatever you want to, but the closure of those 17 hospitals tell us that we need this additional money. And we need those funds. And we have citizens out there who not getting proper health care, just simply because they don't have the adequate funds. And so we want to make sure that we work on that and try to take care of that part of it. The same thing about workforce development and training. We want to make sure that people are able to get trained and have an opportunity to get good paying jobs. And I think it's important that we provide that atmosphere for them to be able to do that. The same thing with our schools. We've got to provide the resources for our young people. I think it's one system we have in the state that they don't even teach calculus. I think that's what it is, because they don't have the people there to teach it. I don't know if it's the money or they can't find the teachers, but this is a school system that, you have this problem. So I think we got to pay close attention to those problems. And then, of course, we always want to make sure that people are safe. Crime is a problem, and we want to look at what we can do to assist in that and let people, have lives that they don't have to have fear of anything happening to them.
Well, I was also I know that right now you're in a special session, so that's going to last, like you said, for a couple more weeks. But when you come back, that's when the regular session gets back going again. And I keep hearing the issue of economic incentives, these incentive laws that need to be updated. That might be one of the top priorities. Is that what you're hearing?
I'm hearing that's probably going to be the first thing we're going to take up, because those incentives run out in the summer. And if they run out, then it's going to have a serious impact on business. One of the things that have allowed us to have additional resources in this state in these kind of times is that we've been able to pull in a lot of other businesses, providing incentives and kind of make the process a lot easier, streamline it for businesses, and it's been attractive for people coming and opening businesses. And I think you're going to see a exerted effort to help small businesses streamline their reporting and being able to, provide funds where that's necessary or where we can provide those funds to stabilize them.
Yeah, and it just seems like a bipartisan issue. I don't see much really disagreement on that. Maybe on the details, but these economic development incentives seem like a bipartisan thing.
You're absolutely right. We were talking about that today. Across the part of the lines, you want to call it, but we all are just senators. We were talking about it today, and we were what the conversation was that it's bipartisan. Because all of us are trying to make life better in our communities. It has nothing to do with party. It has something to do with the quality of life for all our citizens.
Everybody wants jobs.
That's right. Everybody wants the jobs.
Well, Senator, we're out of time, but I hope we can have you back on soon to talk more in depth about these issues.
I'll be glad to come back and look forward to it.
Senator Rodger Smitherman of Birmingham. Thanks again, sir.
And thank you very much.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night, right here on Alabama Public Television at 10:30. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.